there seem to be kind of some clear kind of lines of division between what you're saying. I wonder if I can just get you to reflect back on each other's on one of those. I think Faika and Khadija, if I could just get your responses to what I think Josie and Ralph have sort of agreed on one level. This idea that the burqa does not have the same meaning in Western societies as it has in other societies, that therefore the issue of choice is of a different character in Western societies than in other societies. Josie's suggestion, I guess, Ralph, I'm not sure quite if you were agreeing with this by the end, but in your kind of citation of Fanon at the beginning, that notion that wearing the burqa may be a sign of resistance, it's therefore a positive choice that someone is making. Can I just get your reflections, both of you, on those kind of themes, please?
There are a few issues maybe to raise. So one argument that I have heard, I think from both of you, is that it's a small number. And I do not quite see how this being a small number would be an argument against banning it. So even if it is just a few, it would be deserving of our attention and of a measure that we think is appropriate. So I do not understand how that should, move us away from a ban. And so it was raised to not fine women with a ban. And there are ways around this. So one thing that you can do is to redirect fines, if you have fines, to move forward social change. So to have actual empowerment measures implemented and also financed. So a ban is not exclusive of also pushing for other measures. And I would be very much in favor of that. Do much for the communities, work with the communities and empower women. But there is this one issue of, one of you mentioned this guy in France who then volunteered to pay the fines. Well, just to be clear, this was not a philanthropic maneuver to cover the costs for single mothers who could not pay the fines because of a burqa ban. This was somebody who made a political statement with this and was instigating women to resist an existing ban by offering to pay and cover the fines. So that is the logic and the idea behind it. And comparing this, which happened now a few times, to head coverings or headwear in general, I think is not the debate. We're talking specifically about full body and full face covering. So I'm not discussing hijab. So and I think that is diverting the focus a little bit if we do that. And comparing the situation of somebody, a man who is very public, a rapper, and does whatever he wants, to the situation of a woman with a burqa or a niqab who would never be in that kind of situation unless it is a performance. And that one situation of a woman in a burqa biting an officer's finger and then giving a victory sign is a performance. It is a performance that is, based in a political understanding, what you refer to as radical Islam, where you perform resistance and you perform autonomy. That is not the realistic situation of most women. I know that is a weak argument because, how can you uncover the reality? But especially converts to Islam, not all of them, but there are some who will make it much stronger a performance and a political issue than the general women living under Muslim laws.
Okay, thank you.
Very interesting argument that it was compared, the burqa and niqab was compared with the mosques, which were imposed. I mean, please stop masking the misogyny. Please don't bring this argument in the discussion of an attire that comes with a deeply, inherently misogynistic ideology that looks down on women, that erases women from public and political discourse. So please don't bring this argument. That is a request. And then it was said that state should not be dictating clothing. Let's be honest, we are not talking about any clothing. No other cloth comes with an ideology that confine women within black shrouds that later become tomb of their aspirations and, their aims and their wills and their desires in the end. We cannot just compare these things so casually. And then it was said that in France there has been resistance. A study was conducted in 2022 in School of Economics in Paris. And according to the research, after the ban, the school records of those girls who have not been wearing those hijab and niqab and burqa after the ban, it's been improved. And Muslim women, they are going outside of their communities, exploring the world, even finding, their spouses outside of the community, which is forbidden for the Muslim women. Muslim women cannot marry non-Muslim men. However, it is happening now in France. So change comes gradually, but sometimes you have to take drastic measurement. As I said, there were a minority of women who believe that it is okay to be thrown in burning pyres of their husband back in India in 1861. There are minority of people within Muslim communities who believe that it is okay to cut their little girls at the age of 6 and 7 and say that this is our religious duty that we have performed on our girls. We cannot take the dictation from the minorities who are imposing their intolerant, inhumane views and beliefs on the wider society. And then it was said that...
just make this your final point for now, and then I'll come back. Yeah.
It's just a final point. I just want to say that it's been emphasized over and over again by Ralph that it's just a minority. No, it's not a minority anymore. It's a growing minority. And we can see it around us. There were women who were covering themselves from head to toe. Now there are girls who are covering themselves from head to toe. Now there are children who are wearing a hijab that is touching their feet. So don't say that it's a minority. Thank you so much.
So burqa wearing is a growing minority of people it's taking on and needs to be challenged.
Okay, and the question is not whether the burqa is good or not, and it's not whether its rising number should be treated as a problem. It's how you deal with it, and the question is that does state penalization help or not? And I take the position that penalizing the people who are meant to be the beneficiaries of the ban doesn't help, especially because you mentioned that about fines that they can, we can do community outreach in conjunction with the fines. You don't have to choose. But if you penalize the people who are meant to be the beneficiaries of the ban and you try to do community outreach to them at the same time, are they going to be hospitable to that community outreach as well?
So is community outreach the solution then? You're agreeing that the burqa needs to be challenged?
Yeah. The civil society. And part of the problem is that we don't actually really believe that civil society can regulate itself. So whenever, even beyond the burqa, whenever there's a cultural, social question we face, the answer is immediately, what does the state have to do with it? And say sometimes the state is not the solution to it.
Okay.
Society is.
Josie, the one very clear challenge to what you're saying is that you're establishing a kind of false comparison between the burqa and what it represents, the face veil, and other ways in which you might cover your face, wearing a hat, wearing sunglasses. You're missing the deeper kind of cultural significance that actually is also part of your argument.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing, is that in many ways, if you look at why women are choosing to put the burqa on again, their motivations are not that dissimilar from young people wearing bright masks or faces. It's that kind of defensiveness. And I think that's why there's quite a lot of single mothers, because that kind of feeling of defensiveness against the world, of other people as a threat to you, and you want to hide away. And they say that when I'm wearing the burqa, I feel I can walk down the street and be safe. So I think there's in many ways quite modern concerns The only woman I've seen in a burqa in England was in the British Library with a very broad London accent, right? She's very much of London and of this world, and I think that her concerns in putting that on, even though the dress is a very archaic form of dress, her concerns can be quite modern and can share quite a lot. I think that the small number is important because when you look at the rhetoric that is loaded on it in terms of the burqa as this challenge to the integrity and the togetherness of the French nation, and you think, really, right, 2,000 women can challenge the togetherness of the French nation, 150 women? I think that there is a way in which the problems of the French nation and the problems of integration of the French nation, which are very real, are being loaded upon this item of clothing, and the idea that we ban this and all that will go away. And I just don't think that that is the case. I think, to be clear, the burqa is not a positive thing, right? The fact that we're putting on is really not a good thing. And I think that in a way, when I was talking about the radical edge it has, it's almost just because the twisted circumstances of the state always asking to see your face in that context, which is a very negative, pressured context, then some people covering the face can be an act of resistance. But I wouldn't celebrate that in any respect. I think for me, the face is super important for the social relation, and anybody who covers their face is cutting themselves off. And that is not something that I would want in any respect. So I'm not in any way saying that, I think we're very clear it's a bad thing, but I think the question is, what does it mean and what should you do about it?
Okay, thank you. We've heard lots from the panel. Who wants to speak?
Thank you. I'd like you to reframe this question altogether. I don't think it should be just the burqa. I think all sorts of face coverings. You talked about men, a rapper wearing fully face covering things. What about the people wearing motorcycle helmets when they don't need to, when they're off their bikes? I say let's get rid of all the face coverings. Last weekend I was at a conference in Brighton where there was a tiny moblet of mostly men trying to stop women from having free speech. And they all, without exception, wore face masks as if they had COVID or as if they were keeping this up. Get rid of it. They are a risk to us for our free speech. And by wearing those masks and shouting at us and using loud hailers and drums, they were trying to prevent freedom of speech in our country. And this should be banned for all of us, not just women wearing burqas and niqabs, but men wearing face coverings that help to prevent them being arrested when they deal badly with the rest of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A question on Ralph's final points. You mentioned it was important that this comes from civil society upwards rather than from the government downwards. And I would agree with you for most things, but it seems to me that in this case, the problem is that wearing the burqa means that women can't be in the public space. They're not part of civil society, and therefore they can't have the conversation in the first place for this to come from civil society up. So it seems to me that in this case, the only way that this could possibly be improved is to come from the government down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Faika and Khadija. Absolutely brilliant, very powerful, very persuasive. I think your arguments were just, superb. I was a bit distracted, so I don't know. I hope I'm not duplicating what my friend behind was saying. One thing I do fear, given what we know about the highly misogynist nature of the burqa, of the niqab, is that when women disobey these sort of codes of honor, the consequences can be very, very grave and indeed fatal. So I just wonder what you think about the potential risk to the women if they do not cover. There's a high risk, I'd say, of them just being actually imprisoned, not just behind the burqa, but within the home. And how do we address that to ensure their freedom?
Thank you very much.
Oh, hi. So I'm Muslim, and since free speech is allowed, I wasn't sure how many of the panelists are Muslim, but I've got two questions. First of all, everyone, nobody represents us. Second, I'd love to have seen a niqabi, because I know them, to come and speak. But two questions for the panelists, because I'm Yasmin in #Justice for Yasmin, facing 2 criminal trials. There are women like me fighting back. I reported sex crimes, and I did not get the help. My 2 questions for the panelists is, number 1, why do you think women like us aren't amplified? Because I speak to so many Muslim women, niqabis and hijabis, and they're like, the mosques don't represent us. We are nowhere to be seen apart from rent-a-gobs. Okay? Question 1. Question 2, why do you think, out of the panelists' expertise, there has been a movement towards burqa and hijab, because I ask you now, if you ever meet a Muslim who's grown up from Bangladesh or whatever, go and ask them to open up their photographic albums of their families. All my mothers and aunts were not wearing the hijab. They were wearing the saris. They had their cultural dresses, whether it's Malaysia. And we ourselves are very, very concerned. So 2 questions. Why aren't women like me amplified? Because I'm a Muslim woman, and I'm really upset that often people speak about us. And no, we don't believe in female genital mutilation. We do have a problem with the mosques. There are some good mosques, but often it's led by men for men, and it's a boys' club. And now good Muslims are working and teaching themselves because they don't want to get involved. So sorry for my passionate plea. I'm actually facing a criminal trial and I might end up going to prison, and nobody is standing by me. But I get upset. And thank you to Battle of Ideas for letting me speak.
2 questions to the panel. I'm not actually necessarily in favour of a burqa ban, but there seem to be 2 ideas from those of you who are opposed to it that came across. One is that resistance to the state is a good thing. I don't understand where that assumption comes from and why that assumption is made. There may well be faults and flaws in how the state operates, but let's be clear, people who cover their faces because they're acting out of resistance to the state are very often threatening violence, threatening property damage, intimidating other people through a range of means. It is not in and of itself a good thing. And secondly, to go to another point Josie made, the burqa is not archaic. Following on from what you said, the burqa is something which has been largely introduced and spread since the 1970s. It is a part of the modern world. It is true that since the dawn of time, different societies have veiled women, but the burqa in the form that we understand it is a very modern invention. And I think the premise behind the idea that women are wearing this out of some sense of traditionalism and resistance should be explored, because very often it is actually being imposed on much older cultural norms around Islam.
Slightly building on what this lady said before and what others have mentioned about the safety of women who might choose to not wear the niqab. I also agree it's a shame not to have heard from somebody, a niqabi. That would have been really helpful, probably difficult to arrange, but would have been really, really useful, because there's a lot of talk of what we think these women feel. But I think that whole issue of safety, why is it that some women would like to wear it? Because they feel they go out in society and they feel that they're not going to be, I don't know, the male gaze or whatever. They feel safer. What does that say about our broader society? What does that say about, perhaps, dare I say it, the way men behave in society, such that women feel that they want to protect themselves from that? And rather it just being looking at women, how about we look at, why they want to feel safe from, perhaps the behavior of some men?
I just want to share a little bit about my friend Abdul, who I think practices integrated Islam. He's quite a prominent member of the Muslim community in a major city. And he's raised 3 girls to exercise their free choice. And they have left that city because he felt his prominent status would mean they would be subject to increasing amounts of pressure from Orthodox Islam. And he's finding increasing pressure from Orthodox Islam in the way he attends his mosque, the way he runs his business, and obviously the way he was raising his daughters. So one of the big reasons I'm in this debate or here this weekend is because by 2050, 1 in 10 members of the British population will be followers of Orthodox Islam. And imagine then a large group of people voting along sectarian lines. So Ralph's point, I really associate with Ralph's point that a small c conservative in me really worries about the state proscribing what someone should wear or not, and whether you should penalise the victims of this type of wear. And so it makes me think, though, that sometimes you have to do something harmful that might harm a minority, but actually make it clear that the UK is a society that isn't very comfortable for people who want to follow Orthodox Islam.
Thank you very much.
What I love about the Battle of Ideas is that you've made a deliberate effort to have the opposite point of view, and it really does feel, for those of you who are putting the opposite view to the ban, pretty heroic attempt. But it just shows up the weakness of the arguments, and we've had some of those exposed just in terms of as if a minority isn't an important person in their own right. That individual who is oppressed by men is incredibly important, and it is an affront to society and liberal Western democracy. I just want to address a point to Ralph in particular with your particularly heroic blackboard conclusions. You pointed out that there is a detriment or a penalty to the woman facing the ban in that country, but I think you've overlooked the dynamic of the situation. As you'll be aware that Mill's liberty principle and the paternalistic principle, the principle of harm. So the state should not be encroaching upon the individual freedoms and liberties and expression of citizens until or unless it harms somebody else. And I put it to you that your focus uniquely on the female who being penalised by the ban there is the wrong focus. We're talking about correcting the oppressive husband in that situation. And insofar as we don't have somebody with a niqab here, you will see videos out there of men allowing their women to speak with a niqab, but they're doing it through a whiteboard. They're not even allowed to speak through their face. They're having to do it mediated by a whiteboard. But the question to you then is that the detriment to that woman is as a result of us asserting, the state justifiably asserting and correcting the oppressive behavior of the man who's forcing her to wear that. And moreover, finally, there's the detriment to society overall. Now, I'm incredibly alarmed by the increase in the amount of wearing of the veil in Whitechapel, for example, where I frequent quite a lot. It's incredibly alarming what's going on there. And you will notice that women without the veil, English, British women, also find it oppressive. So haven't you factored at all the negative impact upon others who are having to face the oppression in their midst?
Thank you very much.
I think what Ralph and Josie are missing is that a ban on the niqab is a ban on a ban. That is the essence. So if you are against a ban, by default, it's the niqab you should be opposing, not a measure by the state to remove a ban imposed on women by men, and not just any men, in the most misogynistic men on earth. The example that Josie gave about, well, the French government required the COVID masks at the same time that it's almost like saying that the government opposes knife stabbing, but at the same time allowing for surgeons to cut you with a knife. That's as silly as that argument gets. So I'll just leave it there.
I may disappoint the opposition to a ban, but rather than imposing a ban by the state, can't we take the example of Switzerland, where they had a referendum, bring it back to the democratic public sphere. So in Switzerland in March 2021, there was a referendum to ban public covering of the face, and it won, like Brexit, a narrow majority. But as a democracy, it favoured to oppose the covering of the face. I think focusing on the niqab is a very extreme kind of position. We should be looking at other, actually, because the niqab, let's face it, is about the mesh over the eyes. The hijab is where the eyes are narrowly showing. So we need to kind of talk generally about the public covering of the female face, because I think we're the two wonderful speakers on the left and the right actually made a very, very valid point that it's rooted in a religious extremism, Islam. It's rooted in a misogynistic tradition, Islam again, and we cannot allow that to be allowed in a public, liberal, secular democracy. So let's put it to the public, have a referendum.
Thank you. Okay, panel. Ralph and Josie, I'm conscious there have been lots of challenges. So can I ask you just to make a couple of quick responses? We're going to have another round of questions and then we'll come back to you for conclusion. So this is one or two things at most that you want to just quickly pick up, please. Josie.
No, I mean, I don't think anybody should be able to force anybody else to wear clothing, just they shouldn't be able to force them to get married or force them to cut themselves. I think that is the proper crime that we're talking about, which is coercion in the way that you've interfered with the freedom of somebody else. But I mean, I think one has to really look at the case of France, because it's the place that's actually done it properly. And certainly it's not like odd places you're looking, but all the Guardian reports in the aftermath, you basically interviews with women wearing niqab saying that they could no longer leave the house. And that was actually a case with the UN Court of Human Rights, I think, on that basis. So I think that in many ways, these lead to the exclusion of women who, for whatever reason, feel they have to wear it. I think the idea of oppressive man is really untrue as well in lots of cases. I mean, the property developer who paid the fines, he was against the niqab. He thought it was repressive and didn't agree with it at all. He paid the fines because he thought the state shouldn't tell people what to wear. So I think that one has to look at these cases of what's actually going on. And I think that there's a kind of model of misogyny and religious extremism, that sort of thing, is being imposed on it. But actually the nuances of it is really not that on the ground.
Okay, thank you. Ralph.
Okay, I realise I've taken a few punches in. So, on why has it become more popular within Muslim states? Like, my ancestry is from Nigeria, and the northern part of Nigeria is predominantly Muslim, and the same point applies there. In the past, the niqab was non-existent practically, and it's now more of a thing there. And that's to do with, obviously, a lot of Muslim societies are against it because they see it as an alien cultural import from Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, and a particular kind of puritanical Salafist brand of Islam that's become more popular recently. And of course, it's happened in this country as well. And, it's not like an act of parliament happened to mandate it for Muslims here. So if it came into existence in this country without a law stating it, then it can come out of existence without a ban. Secondly, all face masks being banned. I mean, sure, but that's not, the reason why we're having this discussion is because of the burqa. It's because of the Muslim face veil. And also to the point about, well, don't some women have to be penalized to, a utilitarian kind of argument. But isn't that just collateral damage? And I don't think that's necessary.
Okay, thank you. Khadija.
The point was made regarding violence against women, that how to protect these women from violence that takes place within the four walls of their own homes. I was actually expecting my fellow panelists to enlighten us how to protect these women, because both of the panelists, they have not particularly expressed their liking for the burqa and niqab, but they have their other reasons not to ban it by the state. However, they did not tell us that those women who are forced to cover themselves from head to toe, what are they going to do to protect themselves from that abuse that is inflicted on them in the name of religious modesty. And in case they defy those religious modesty code, the torture, the violence, and in extreme cases, I'm not talking about in Muslim countries anymore here, I'm talking about the West, when girls, they rebel, in extreme cases, they are killed by their own family members. How can they protect themselves? We are very much concerned about women who are paying £500, but we are not concerned about those women who are paying price with their own lives to defy these modesty codes. And then I would say we are criticizing France a lot for banning these attires. We are refusing to see the change that has come in French society. I have the opportunity to visit France often. I can see that women, they have not fled France, I can tell you, Muslim women are still residing in France. Muslim girls are still going to schools, colleges. However, the baggage they were carrying, the religious and cultural baggage they were carrying of their family's owner or their religious owner, they have been taken off. And I'm very happy for them.
Thank you.
I also want to warn against generalizations when it comes to covering one's face and to make it as if this was comparable to other issues, because it takes away the gendered aspect of it. And if it was not for that, we would not be having this discussion at all. If men would equally be doing this voluntarily or coerced or under various circumstances, this would not be an issue. So comparing to a motorcycle helmet or COVID masks or anything else is taking away the focus. So now if one of the main objections is about fining women and the amount of fines and the tragedy that might bring, if that's the only issue that's left, then I think we could move ahead very well, because we ban a number of other practices, or at least we would want to from a feminist position. And I'm trying to make the feminist case, not necessarily an individual case, because somebody asked the question, so who's Muslim here on the panel? And I can tell you my father is Muslim. My family from my father's side is a Muslim family. But still, you know, it would not be representative of the Muslim position on this. And so I'm trying to make here a feminist position. And that would also say we would want to ban surrogacy as a practice. We would want to ban prostitution. And how would you go about that? And there are models, legislative models, that would clearly say, do not fine the women, you know, don't penalize the women, but still address the system clearly with a ban. And we can do the same kind of thinking and say we can have a ban, and then we think about who is going to be penalized, who is going to be fined, and in what way.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to try and take as many points from the floor as we can.
A number of the panelists suggested that outlawing the burqa would be a good idea, and cited FGM as an example of a positive way of dealing with a problem. At a risk of making myself increasingly unpopular here, can I suggest that the law against female genital mutilation, female circumcision in Britain was introduced in 1980 and hadn't been nobody did anything about it until about 12 years ago, when campaigners and activists decided that there was an epidemic of FGM in Britain and persuaded the government and the whole country essentially to be advised about it, and campaigns educated us about it, etc., etc. And this epidemic, as it happens, turned out to be non-existent. But nevertheless, campaigners decided that because of the education that was necessary, that families needed to be policed who they deemed to have children at risk. To the extent the families were policed, were surveyed, were put through hell for no reason other than the fact that somebody assumed that their children were at risk when they weren't, because the practice had more or less been disappeared here already.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't it contradictory to say that the burqa is imposed by men and call for a state, another male-dominated institution, to dictate what women wear? We're talking about empowerment, but empowerment truly means giving women the freedom to choose. How can we claim to liberate them by criminalizing one of their choices? Now we're talking about burqa and niqab. What about in 10 years? We're talking about hijab. What about nuns? What about other women who veil? What about people wearing turbans?
Focusing on identification, for example, in Jason Riley's Please Stop Helping Us, he talks about how police normally pick up on boys who wear, face coverings or masks because it is an issue of who are you, what are you up to? So I'm wondering, will the same thing, should you apply the same knowledge or the same thought to women who are covering their face completely? It's an issue, it's a different problem, or I don't even think it's a problem when it comes to hijab where you can see someone's face. But when it comes to something that's not in the Quran, that the Quran just tells women to lower their gaze and act of modesty, When do we draw the line?
Okay, thank you.
An aspect to this that doesn't seem to have garnered anybody's consciousness yet, which is shame. The fact is that this doesn't just affect the women who wear the mask, the facial covering. It affects every woman in the community. If you don't wear the mask, you are shamed. You are seen to be in this sexist, woman-hating setup available, it's that whole double standard thing again, But it affected me particularly with relation to prostitution, like for instance. So I grew up in Docklands in Edinburgh, right? There was a lot of prostitution, and it affects every single girl and woman in the community. It's not just an individual thing of who decides to wear it. It's how it affects the women who don't wear it. It's how it affects other women in that community. One more thing, very briefly.
Quickly, yeah.
We have seatbelts and we have motorcycle helmets, right? Neither of those things would have been adopted if the state hadn't forced them to be adopted. Right?
Okay, thank you.
I live in West Yorkshire, and for a long time I've worked in Dewsbury and Batley, which has a very big, strong Muslim community, some of it very orthodox. And there are loads of women wearing the burqa, and there's a place called Savile Town. You drive through there and you will see loads of women. Many of these women are new wives who've been brought in, but they have no communication. But the point that I want to make is, and it's a difficult debate that we're having, and I really want to thank you for opening up this in such an intelligent way. But there's a difference between, I'll be quick, between the state, society, and community. And so our interactions where I live are with the community. And you may remember there's a very famous case where a teacher in a Batley school refused to take off her niqab, and it went to court. And she lost because it was important that her face was seen, her lips were seen to move, her eyes were seen to be lit up when she was teaching children language. And so there's something about how we communicate with each other, which means that we have to interact through our faces. And so we're reading each other all the time. And if we don't read each other as individuals, how can we read each other as part of a community?
Burqa ban sounds a good idea, but I'm a bit concerned about enforcement. A rule or law is no good if it isn't enforced, and the state of policing currently, could be way, way better. And we've seen the police not interfering or stopping clear criminal offences like mass raping, like, say, Rotherham, Rochdale, but many, many other places. Even though rape is clearly outlawed, the police were not wanting to get involved because it could be racist. Clearly, with a burqa ban, it could be seen as racist interfering, and they might just go for somebody with light skin, just who has a scarf over their nose and just hand out fines there, but ignoring burqa wearers or anybody else for fear of being seen racist. Well, I mean, there's a risk of further inequality by a law being unequally applied.
It seemed that I thought at first maybe it would be 2-a-side for the burqa. It seems to be 4-0 against the principles of the burqa. So if the debate is about the ban itself, a question for Ralph. You said that we should have a more civil society approach to this rather than top down from the government. You said it should be each individual public institution, every single business. You talked, though, about it being fractious and that you are worried about the burqa being a contributing factor towards isolated communities. What would be the effect if the butcher and the baker banned the burqa but the candlestick maker allowed it? If every school and hospital had their own policies, it would be an even more fractious debate than it is today.
Thank you. I don't think we've yet addressed what I think is the fundamental problem, which isn't necessarily so much the burqa. I think it's government power. I think people see the burqa and they feel a wave of Muslims pouring into the country and instantiating a burqa demand. And I think that people see the burqa ban and think that there's going to be a right-wing crackdown on Muslims, blah, blah, blah. I saw an interview with Peter Hitchens, younger brother of my hero, Christopher Hitchens. Can I get a few smiles? Yes? Great.
Go on quickly, though.
Yes, quickly. He said, why shouldn't there be equality before the law? Someone shouldn't be arrested for violence and then also arrested for being racist. I think this equality before the law, this hate law stuff, creates government power, and that attracts people with malevolent intentions on either side, which will steer us in the bad way. If that can be addressed, if we can get rid of hate laws, then we can address the power, which is the real threat here, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Panel, I'm going to be really unfair and ask you to make some very quick closing comments, I'm afraid. Faika, can I get you to speak first, please?
So just 2 points I want to address. One is that for everybody thinking about how this could change from within the community or in any other way than through a ban, This is not going to change because there are those who benefit from it being the way it is. So why would you voluntarily give up this power? It is not going to happen. You have to understand that there is a group that benefits from this. It is not just a general phenomenon. And the second thing is that, so why is there so much outrage about this issue and why is it such a priority suddenly? I just want to say that from within feminist positions, this is not something that has come up yesterday. Feminists have been talking about this for a long time, regardless of the number of women that you yourself individually might see or might be aware of. It is a feminist issue and has been for years and more, decades back. And so now maybe this is some easy point scoring for some in the political spectrum on the far right, but the harvest will be plentiful if nothing is done about this from the leftists, the progressives, the liberals, and not in the context of this making this a divisive issue of left or right, but actually also seeing that this is a fundamental women's rights issue.
Thank you very much indeed.
We all agree that there is a problem with the burqa and niqab. But again, the question is, how do we deal with it? And my very, very basic point is that giving more power to the state to intervene on these questions is very wrong-headed, especially because, yes, there are plenty of very deep and complex social problems that are real problems. That's why I made the reference to prostitution. Yet, a really bad way of dealing with prostitution is criminalizing the victims of it. And likewise, I don't think that that's the best way to do it. And that does not mean that you're not concerned about the issue at hand. And that's the problem. It's about means, not ends.
Thank you, Ralph. Josie?
Yeah, I think that the question of exclusion of Muslim women is not the result of a certain number of women wearing the burqa, and it's not going to be solved by a ban on the burqa. I think it's good to be curious about why people are covering their face and what that meaning is. I think that is very fluid. It's very different now to the meaning that the burqa has traditionally. And I think the point made about this is not just about the burqa, it's about all kinds of headwear. That's very much the case in France. I mean, you've had regulation of the headscarf in lots of different areas, and now it's the burkini is a massive issue. So the mayor of Cannes banned burkinis in 2016 as an extremist symbol. And he said, the conspicuous display of religious signs, in this instance in the shape of beachwear, is susceptible to create or increase tensions and risk affecting public order. So a very small number of people wearing what's effectively a wetsuit, a small number of women, effectively a wetsuit, is going to risk creating tensions and affecting public order. It's this extreme fetishism. You're basically placing the whole problem of society upon a certain number of women in their clothing. And in that, you are punishing them. They do get fined.
Okay.
They do get abused in public and they're not allowed to leave their homes. So I think we have to be clear about what the burqa is responsible for and what it isn't. And it can't bear the whole weight of all exclusion and social problems.
Josie, thank you. Khadija?
I'm here just saying what the facts are. It's not my personal opinion or liking or disliking. The words such as rhetoric, obsession, fetishism, Islamophobia, racism, these all words, buzzwords, these have been used to just shut down the debate on this issue that, as Faika said, that is a women's rights issue, that is a security concern in the free Western democracies. And even the Muslim majority countries, they see it as such. And now we would say that we don't want to do anything that they do in the Muslim majority countries because they are totalitarian and theocratic, and now they are trying to be liberal like us. And why are we heading? We are literally heading towards a Sharia compliant state because these kind of things are normalized in Sharia compliant state. Okay. And the cultural relativism that we have here in the Western society, that is, I think, very concerning because that tells us do not say anything bad about anybody's culture. No, don't worry about children who are being forced to wear it. Don't worry about the women who are tortured in the four walls or their own homes. Just say all cultures are equal. I say I am not going to say it.
Can we thank all of the panelists for an excellent debate?